Okay, so like I said right before the break, there's some more things we can do to get a little bit more visual appeal going on our pages. I'll go ahead and share the screen. The first one I'm going to mention here is something I almost never use myself. The only reason I'm going to mention it is the book uses it, and it does have some advantages. And that's what's called a horizontal rule. It's a straight line, a straight horizontal line. And the tag for that is just HR. So yeah, just a straight gray line across the page. And that's pretty much all it is. There's a little bit we can do with CSS on it, a little bit of styling, but not very much. And I wouldn't have mentioned it except it was in the book. And it does have one big advantage, and that's just one of our basic tags, right? That's something that goes back to the beginning of web pages. So it's something users are very familiar with seeing. And we're going to talk about this, some graphic design concepts, maybe Wednesday, it might be next week. But sometime soon, we're going to talk about some of the ideas, concepts, conceptual things in graphic design. And one of those is familiarity. That's a big deal with logos and stuff, right? You won't show people what things they're familiar with, and they help, even if it's subtle things like the horizontal line, in the back of their mind, it feels familiar, and they'll be more comfortable with your page right off the bat. So that's there. It's just the tag, just HR. Personally, I almost never use that. That's the advantage of it, because we can do the same thing with borders, and we have a whole lot more control over borders around things. So, which are also styled with CSS. So I'm gonna put a couple paragraphs here. To duplicate that, in most text editors, you can push Control D to duplicate and just have several paragraphs going on there. I'll change them up a little. Random words, more random words, another set of random words, just to have something on there, and maybe one more paragraph down here. Stuff. I don't really have anything. I guess I'm not feeling very creative today. Coming on, the winter's starting to drag on. Whenever the weather gets warmer and things plants start blooming out, I might have some better sentences to put together, but just have some words on the page. Some stuff there, a couple paragraphs, and I guess we could put some class names on them to help identify them. So like bottom class and class equals top. And I'll just class equals middle. I'm not sure if I'm going to need these or not. I just thought I'd go ahead and throw some stuff on here because we're going to be doing stuff mostly in CSS. And I might want to single out the paragraphs. That way we can kind of see them and compare differences. So first off, I'm just going to do a basic paragraph selector and put some borders on there, which is just a line around it. And there's three things. I guess I should write this on the board real quick for what we want in the border. So we have the border property, and there's actually several of them. We can do border top, border, so like border dash top, or border dash left, dash right, dash bottom, and go all the way around, do them one at a time, or we can do them all at once. And we can also set specific things, like we could do a border dash size. and a border dash color and a border dash style, or we can put them all at once. So we can say border and then pass in the size we want it to be, like how many pixels wide or whatever sizing convention we're using. How big is the border going to be? Then space delimit it, pass in the style information, then a color, and just pass in all three properties. Or we can do them one at a time. For our example today, I'm just going to do them all as one big thing. Maybe look at one that's that same way. But we just take the border property. So we'll say like border, and then pass in some sort of style. And the one I'm going to start with here is one that I often put in the CSS. I put it in every single element, and that's something like a 1 pixel. So the size will be a 1 pixel wide border. I'll just do dashed for now. We could do different ones. 1 pixel dashed red. So a size, a style, and a color. And I'll often put that one right there in everything, every CSS page. And that way I have what you can see here, where every paragraph is completely surrounded by that border. You see the border around the paragraph. And then just turn that off and on basically with comments. So like comment that line on and off, and just turn it on when there's a need to see the edges of things for lining things up and laying them out on the page. So that's our basic idea, is that border, and then pass in the size, the style, and a color for it. So some other ones, probably want maybe something a little bit bigger. I'll do maybe 8 pixels, 8 pixel wide border. That way it's big enough to see everything here. And we have a lot of options of styles. One of those being none. So I'll start with that. I'll type in a style of none, which basically means no border. You might as well have just left this off, but it's included. And then some sort of color. So like 43A to B7. Some sort of color on it. But the style is none, so that means there's no border there. The next option, well, the obvious one would be solid. Think of a border, just one solid color surrounding that. Not a very interesting border. We have dashed and dotted, which are just different sizes of the same thing. Like dashed, you can see it's these nice little long dashes with spaces in between, or dotted. Kind of like polka dot, looks like polka dots when they're right next to each other. Double is one that can make some nice looking borders. Just sort of a double edge around it. Groove. It has some like light and dark spots, and it's starting to try to look like there's a little bit of a three-dimensional segment to it. When we get to lab time later, you're going to want to kind of go through the list and play around, try different things, see which mix and match the styles, because it doesn't necessarily have to be the overall border, because we can also do the border top and just put that groove along the top, and then maybe border bottom, do something like 5 pixels double and then some number. B277A8. I just made up some hex number, but a couple colors, and then we can have different borders on each side of the thing and highlight what it is. Well, that's why I always use this instead of a border, especially like a border at the bottom, instead of a horizontal rule, because we have a whole lot more control over it. We can adjust it, have a whole lot more control over what it is. I'm gonna go back to like it was and just do the regular border. Ridge, that's the opposite of groove. Well, let me go back to what it was. So there's a groove. If I switch to ridge, it just kind of reverses all those colors. When we start adding shadows and you have different layers, that groove and ridge has a lot more, you'll see how the meanings apply a lot better. It makes sense. Especially these last two. When it's just the border, it's kind of hard to see what's going on. So like inset, you can see the dark colors on the left and top and a light color on the right and bottom. Or we can do outset, which reverses that, puts the light on the left and top and the dark stuff on the right and bottom, which might seem a little bit odd by itself, but that's because that typically goes with a shadow. Yeah, I'll write this on the board. I'll put a shadow on here, and then that'll hopefully make a little more sense. And again, we have control over each different one, so we could do the border top, border bottom, left, right, each side individually, or we can do the border dash size, border dash style, border dash color, each one individually, or do them all at once. And we have the same thing with shadows. We have two types of shadows. They basically work the same. We have either a box shadow or a text shadow. It's kind of like the name implies. So a box shadow puts the border around the box, so like around the entire paragraph. As a text shadow puts the shadow on the words. We'll see that here. We'll see those on the page here in just a second. And then the numbers we need, how do I have them labeled in my notes? I put, so by default, well, this is either going to be the right or the left size. So maybe 10 pixels, depending, and it's either going to come out 10 pixels from the right or 10 pixels from the left, depending on which one we set it in. The next number is the top or bottom size. These will probably make more sense when we see it in an example and you can see how changing them affects things. The third number is the blur radius. So maybe if we use left and bottom, maybe we're coming out 10 pixels from the left, 5 pixels on the bottom, and the blur radius is how far it would take to dissipate completely. So if it was like 5 pixels over, 10 pixels down, and then maybe a blur of 15, the shadow is not going to completely fade out. But if we went 5 over and 10 down, and then set the blur at like 7 or something, it would completely fade out on the way down. So the blur is how far it takes to phase out. The fourth one is what color is the shadow going to be. And the fifth one is out or in, outset or inset, which matches those names of those borders we just saw. And they'll make a little more sense there. And same ones on text shadow. So let's look at this. Oh, and we also have size independent. So we could take like box dash shadow dash left and just have a shadow on the left and all sorts of different things. But that's something you'll want to, kind of mess around with and see during lab time. Try different things. So here next to the border right now, it's set for an outset. So I'm going to put in a box shadow and then put in these numbers. So I'll do left and bottom. You notice if we set the border to outset, it's the bottom and left sides that are the darker color. So I don't know, 7 pixels, 10 pixels, and then a blur radius. I'll start at like 18 pixels, and then some sort. So 18 pixels is how far it would take to fade out completely. And then some sort of color. I'll just do a gray, something gray, like 87, 87, 87. That's a gray color. And if we don't put anything, it's an outset. So by default, it does an outset shadow. You can see, put a little bit down below it and to the left. But it looks like that shadow goes all the way down to the next thing. It was too far to really fade out. So if I change that blur radius down to something smaller, like maybe 6 pixels on the blur radius, then you can see the shadow fades out before it gets to the next thing. So it's the distance it goes to the left, the distance it goes down, and then how far for that shadow to fade out completely, and then what color is the shadow. And if we don't put anything, it's an outset. You can see it's kind of set up like that border, outset border, and the default shadow is like the light is coming in from the top left. If you want an inset border, you just type the word inset, and that will move it to the right and top sides and put it inside the element instead of outside. I guess this border would match if I change the border to say inset. And that's the one that looks like it's sunken in. Like the light is still coming from that top left direction, but it's now with the dark, where the dark and light colors are, it's supposed to look like it's sunken in or raised outward. And then that, yeah, when we get to lab time, you'll just want to kind of play around with some of those things and get used to them. And we can put negative numbers here. So if I put -7 pixels, what do you think is going to happen? So it's an inset border, which means there's shadow on the inner left and top. So what do you think? Does anybody have any guesses on what a negative size does? No guesses? I'll go ahead and just hit reload. You see now the negative side, negative numbers move it to the other side. Maybe that's easier to see in the outset. So if I switch that from an inset to an outset one, and I reload it, notice now the shadow is over here on the right side instead of the bottom. Or instead, it's on the left side instead of the right. If I make the other one, that top bottom one negative, when I reload it, negative is the top side. So you can adjust which way that shadow gets cast off of things. And then adding those in can make make your pages look so much better because you get that, start to get that 3D effect. I'm going to clear that out and use those class names now. But I have top, middle, other, and bottom. So dot top, dot middle, dot other, and dot bottom. We can do different things on each one. So we can do the board, all those all at once. So like a border color, and make that. I don't know. I'm just going to put random. I'm just going to put words in at this point. We've already talked about colors, so probably something better than just the named color green. But if all we're doing is the color, there's not enough information to draw that border. So if we split it up, we do need all the different ones. So like border size, 2 pixels, and border style. I don't know, groove. One of the words off the list. And gets us a small one with a groove, which 2 pixels isn't really enough to see, so I'm going to make that bigger. Did I type something wrong there? Border. Is it not size? Maybe I just don't need the word size. Nope, because that turned off the colors altogether. And this is, well, for some reason the size isn't working, so I think I might be looking at the wrong word. Which I heard a couple people mention already. You know, there's a lot to remember here. If you can't remember it, just look. You can check Google for it. Border size and CSS, and see what the property is. Oh, border width. And usually you don't even have to click through links. So the little preview will be enough for the words that we're looking for, right? So it's not a size I want. I'm at the border dash width. So remember, there's lots and lots of references. We don't have to necessarily remember every single thing here. So we can do it all separately, or like we saw, all at once. We can just say border. And then we can do add in words, so like top, bottom, left, right. I'll do that on one of them down here. Or we can do it all at once. So border, let's say 5 pixels, dotted, teal. Probably better, you might have some better ideas for colors. I'll do border dash bottom that way. And just, we don't have to put the border all the way around it. We can just use that to underline things. Or by itself, 7 pixels, outset, orange, which might as well throw a box shadow in here. So once again, to reiterate that one more time, it's the left or right size. So maybe 3 pixels to the left or right. Then the up or down, so 5 pixels up or down. Then some sort of color, maybe a yellow shadow this time. And either the words outset or inset. And if it's outset, you don't actually have to type anything. So if you leave that last word off, it's the outset. Oh, and notice how that gave like a solid color. If y'all can see that, maybe I'll zoom in a little. Notice how that, I just put the left, right, top, bottom, and it produced a solid color. So you probably also want the blur radius, so maybe 7 pixels to blur it and make it look more shadowy. So if you don't put the blur radius, it's a solid color. If you do, it's kind of blurs it in like a shadow. And what can I do on the bottom one? I guess I can put the text shadow here because we haven't really talked about this. And the reason I haven't, well, I couldn't leave it off because it's something common. But if I go to put a text shadow, it's kind of the same thing. So, well, for one, the letters are right there next to each other, right? Anybody have any suggestions on how big this shadow should be? Probably pretty small, right? I'll try 2 pixels. 2 pixels each way with a blur of maybe 4 pixels. And I'll use some gray color, 999999. Some gray color right in the middle. That's not too bad with that very light color. As colors get darker though, 43, 43, 43, it can at times start to make the words a little hard to read. So with text shadows, you just want to make sure and use them kind of sparingly because, well, that's just on one word, so it's not too bad. But whenever you stick that into a paragraph, so if I move that up to the other paragraph, let me copy that and paste that in here. You see, it starts to blur things up. So you just want to be careful with text shadows. It can, in the right place, it can make a big effect. I guess what I use them for most often, I'll comment this out for a second and show you where I actually use those the most. So maybe there's for a background color, some dark background color like forest green and a foreground color that's really bright. I'll just do white. Might not need the dash there. Yeah. So a dark background color with white lettering on top of it, that can be very, very sharp. So what I'll usually do with text shadows is, well, not a dark color, so something like EF. Some just sort of off-white color, a very bright gray. I'll throw that on there to kind of smooth that out, smooth out the edges. Probably not even that much. Let me try like 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 3 pixels. So yeah, so if it's a dark background with a very light colored text on top of it, I'll often use a very, very small text shadow just to kind of smooth out the rough edges. If I go ahead and put fully white there, so it's the same color as the text, because the shadow will always be a little bit lighter. Yeah, something like that where it's not so sharp of an edge. I guess the green and white there is not too bad, but sometimes the dark backgrounds and the really light text will contrast to each other a bit too much. So about the only time I ever use text shadow is to back off that contrast. If a dark background and white text has too much of a contrast, I'll just use a very, very small shadow to kind of smooth out the edges. yeah, green and white's not the best example, but as you're playing around with it in lab time here in a little while, just kind of keep some things like that in mind. Any questions about those? I see something in the chat room. And yeah, whenever we get to, we can do some lab time. I think this is the last thing on the list, isn't it? Oh, image maps. Yeah. A couple more things on the list. Whenever we get to lab time and you start messing around with things, it'll kind of make more sense. Well, I thought there was something in the chat room. Okay. So I have a question with what's on the screen there. Well, I guess I could have left the screen sharing while I asked this question. I'll go ahead and maximize this. If I wanted to measure these paragraphs with borders around them and the words there, does anybody have any thoughts about or guesses about where the measurements go? Is it inside the borders or outside the borders? And what about the space in between, right? Like the bottom of this paragraph's right here, and this paragraph doesn't start to right here. So any thoughts about where the measurements start on those sort of things? I'll erase the board here. So we have something like this for we'll have some sort of content in there, usually words, maybe pictures or something, and then this is like our paragraph element, right? Maybe a nice wide border. So we have the content, some spacing around that content, which that's padding. So the stuff between our content and the border is padding. And I'll do like this. The space between the border and the next element is the margin. So we can kind of use that to space things out. So another element over here. And then that in between them is the margin. Yeah, so in the chat room there, it says the measurement is inside. So if we say make that element I don't know, 18 pixels tall, we're just measuring there from the border to the border. So basically the padding and the content is what we measure. If we want to include the rest of it, we have to specifically say that in our CSS. So if we want it to go outside, that's called the box model. And to apply that in our CSS, oh, there we go. There's different types of box models. So the default one is just showing inside the borders. If we want to change it to one of the other ones, we have to say what we're going to change it to. And there's a selector involved here. That this is a good place to introduce it because we haven't seen it yet. If we're going to change how we're calculating our sizes, we probably want to do that on everything, right? We probably want to measure everything the same way. So either all inside or all outside. So to select everything, we do have a wildcard selector. Our normal wildcard symbol, you may have seen that in other places, right? For database queries, the asterisk to select everything. You use it in Google searches, but basically the select everything symbol. The standard one that we see in other places, which would just be an asterisk. So that's saying apply these rules to everything. And our attribute is box sizing. And if you want it to go to the outside, you put border box. Which doesn't really look different, but yeah, if you want to apply the sizing rules to the outside of the box rather than and include things like the margins or include the borders. If you want to include the borders, you set up that property right there. It always looks exactly like that. Otherwise, it's only the content and the padding. So if you set up your sizes and think you have the 9 pixel tall font and 3 pixels of border of 3 pixels of padding, and then a 4 pixel wide border, then you're gonna need what? 9 plus 3 is 12, plus 4 on the top and 4 on the bottom. So 20 pixels to include that whole thing. Or if you don't want to include the border and allow borders to overlap and overflow on their own, then you would set up, just leave that property off. So I guess I can talk about this a little bit more. I'll use this middle paragraph here. Like I said, padding is this space in between. Well, I use this one that's fully surrounded. So if we wanted to move these words here away from that border a little, we can set padding and then say how big of pad, how much space we want before we get to the border. So maybe 5 pixels away from the border. And it just gives us a little bit more room all the way around it, spaces it out. We can make it even bigger than that, maybe 15 pixels. That way it's very accentuated. So that's padding, and like normal, we have padding dash each side. So we could do like padding dash left, or dash to put it just on the left side, or just on the top or bottom, or wherever we want it. Or there are shortcuts for the numbers over here. Because we could say, well, I've been using pixels, so I'm going to, instead of pixels, I'll say 1.5 EM. Remember, that's the one based off the font size. So 1.5 of that font size around all the way around. So just a bunch of space around those words, between the words and the borders. But we could put in more than one argument. So maybe if I put in 2 things, like 1.5 EM and 12 pixels. Hopefully that's going to show different. Yeah. So when we have 2, the first one is the top and the bottom, and the second one is the left and the right. Or we can do 3. I'll do 2% just to kind of mix things here. So if I maximize this, we can see the whole. No, I should probably leave it like it was. So if we have 3, the first one's the top. The second one is the left and the right. And the left and the right will be evenly spaced because evenly spaced if there's like a line wrap or something. Obviously, you can see from maybe that top box there, there's no padding on the right or the left. And the right, there's no padding either, but the paragraph element continues all the way across the page. We didn't set a different width for the paragraph element. So there's that issue with padding. But if there's like a word wrap or something, the middle number is the left and the right, and will apply to both of them. And then the third number is the bottom. And if we have 4 numbers, a very small one. 4 numbers does the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. So it just starts at the top and goes around clockwise. So top, right, bottom, left. And margins are the same way. We have different things. Margin is the space between them. So I'll put it on this one as well. Margin of 2.3 EM. So a nice big margin, bigger than the text. So when I reload it, you see there's extra space all the way around it. It's separated from the edge of the pages, brought down a little, and then the next element falls below it. We're going to come back and talk about margins, especially there's some overflows that are allowed. Like if we have a bottom margin on one and a top margin on the other, it's not going to add those together necessarily. We'll talk about that soon. But again, we could set that for each side individually, like margin top, margin bottom, or pass in a different number of arguments each time. And it would follow the same thing as padding. So one goes, if we just give it one number, that applies to every side. If we give it 2 numbers, the first is the top and the bottom, and the second's the left and the right. 3 numbers is the top, the sides, and then the bottom. And 4 numbers starts at the top and goes clockwise. Just to kind of space things out a little bit there. And I'm just going to do this on one corner. It follows suit for the same for all of the other ones. So I'm going to put it here. On this same paragraph, we have a padding, margins, border, box shadows. One thing, well, like box, the word box shows up to several places. Everything has those nice sharp corners, right? We can round those off and make them, smooth them off, round them off. So that is called a border radius, and we have to say which corner it is specifically. So like border dash top dash left. I will spell it left. Radius. Top left. Radius. Yeah. And then we give it some sort of percentage. It's always going to be a percent. So maybe round that off by like 20%. So the top left, that's going to be this corner right here. And instead of a sharp corner, I'm going to round that off by 20%, just to make it a smooth curve. And usually you can specify each corner in particular.
But if I didn't specify anything, I get them all the same?
Yes, that's what I was getting ready to type in. See, they're all 20% curve there. Or you could specify like top. The top didn't do anything. What about left? I usually do each corner individually. You know, it's just left didn't do anything. So if you don't want to do them all, you do have to specify corner by corner. Top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right.
And if I want to give each corner a different one, I just put them in order, just like you were doing the 4 numbers for the other one. Might the radius work like the paddings?
Oh, like this, which is 4 numbers.
Yeah,
like 20.
Yeah. I think that works.
Let's check.
I think the book says it does, but
20%, 10%. The best way to check, best thing to do is just check, right? So we put in 2 numbers, 20%, 10%. Pictures are in my way. It looks like it did the top left at 20% and top right at the 10%. Then the bottom right is back to that big 20%. And the bottom left is back to the 10%. So that seems to alternate between the corners. Let's see what a third number does. Something big, 40%. So it looks like that just got that one down there. So that's like the top left, then the middle number is the bottom left and top right, and the third number is the bottom right. And fourth number, I need something, hopefully 30%, we'll be able to see a difference. And the third number, when there's 4 numbers, it's just like the borders. It starts at the top left and just goes around clockwise. So yes, you can put them in that way or specify each corner individually. And that's how we can get some non-square shapes going on in there. I'm gonna switch this back to just 1 number. Something kind of, whoops. So yeah, there's more than one way to enter the things and get the same results. So once again, it's something to just kind of play around with, mess around with it and get used to it. Oh, and notice the shadow followed it. So the shadow, this is probably worth mentioning. The shadow followed that, and we can still see it's set to an outset border, so there's still distinctly a top and a bottom. But what about like up here? This had a distinct different one. Which one did I have to use there? Groove. So I switched that to a groove. They still follow, but sometimes they line up very differently. Again, you'll just want to mess around with it and see what they look like. Those borders will follow that curve around. I'll go back to what that was. Let's see, what else did I have in here? Yeah, so these, get through all these today. And you'll want to kind of play around with them and get used to different things that might be going on with them. Kind of get a feel for what they look like, because again, the homework in the textbook is going to say type these words. It's going to tell you what to do, so you'll type that in and it's going to look a certain way. But ultimately, you kind of want to have a bit of a feel for what this stuff's going to look like so you can make your own stuff, right? If you have an idea in your head, you can make the web page look like the idea in your head, which does take a little bit of practice. So a couple other things. that I have on here. What's 310? Actually, I'll just do one real quick because it's been close to an hour since the break. And that's background images. So let me grab an image for a background. Actually, I always like to show this in class at some point. So I'm going to create a new one here in Microsoft Word. And usually we want, has everybody heard of like tiled images? Do you know what I'm talking about if I say tiled images? The ones that line up, right? Well, most pictures we have, if we take that and put a copy of it right next to it, they're not necessarily going to line up. So you want to often have images that line up nicely. So I'm going to make one that'll line up here. So I'm just going to grab a shape here in Microsoft Word, turn the outline off, and then some sort of fill color pattern, maybe a crown color, and I don't know, a light green. And then when I draw the box, you get this nice little pattern here. What's another color to mix with that? Maybe something blue. I'll do another one. And maybe one more green, a couple layers there. And just kind of layer these patterns so that it starts to give it some sort of texture. What was in the chat room? Oh, so there was a question about connecting these. And remember, this tag right here is the one that connects them. So it's the link tag and it goes in the head. Then we have to have these attributes in it. We have to say the relevance of it, which will always be style sheet, and then a hyperlink reference to where it's located to kind of connect those things. You're welcome. Let's see. So oh yeah, the images. So that gets a nice little pattern, and we could use that as a background, stretch it out over the whole thing. But I just kind of put that pattern together randomly, so things don't really line up. So what I like to do is a quick way to do this. Probably not a final version, but if you know you're going to have a tile background, just have something to work with. You can just push Control A to select everything, and then copy that. I'll put Control C. And if I just stretch that over and hit Control V to paste it, then that thing I just pasted in, I can right click on it and flip it horizontally. So now those left and right sides line up. And just kind of move it into place. And then obviously that side there in the middle lines up. But this edge over here is just the flipped mirror image of this edge over here. So that's going to line up on those sides too. And then we can do the same thing with the top and bottom. Just select everything. So Control A, Control C to copy it, get a little bit of space and paste it in. And then right click and flip vertically. And then put it in position. And now the top and bottom of that image, of that just kind of randomized pattern, will line up as well. So that's a really quick way to make tiled images. So if you're working on something that you know is going to have tiled images, but you're waiting on the art department to deliver them, you can put a little test image like that together. And you can see it went together really, really quickly. So usually what I do is I'll take like 15 minutes and make 20 of those, make 20 or 30 of them and just pick the best looking one. And just very quickly get an image that's tiled. And at least a placeholder image while you wait on a nice one from the art department. I'll call this back.ping. Save that as a name. The last thing I want to talk about is background images as CSS. So you probably want the background image to apply to the entire body of the page, right? So most often we put them in the body tag, but we can put a background image any place we want. So if you wanted the background image just on a paragraph, so like on this top one, whoops, I'll put it here first. Our property is like normal with CSS, it's spelled out with the dash. So background image, and then the value we pass in is we pass in this function called URL, and in the parentheses, we just have to say where to find that image. And this one is a little odd if you're really used to doing a lot of computer stuff and doing programming. It seems like across the board, it's a standard that directory paths are always passed in as a string. If we have a bunch of file structures, folders, and folders, a whole big directory structure to get to a file, we always pass that in as a string, except for this. This is like the only place I know where it's not passed in as a string. Here, you just type it in directly. And if you put quote marks, it messes it up. So it's different than normal, but this is the only place I know of that is that different than normal, which makes it a little bit easier. At least it's not a whole bunch of places we have to check, but when we pass a directory path into CSS, we cannot pass it in as a string. The reason for that is because when the computer processes this, all of this will be processed as a string. So if we put a string inside of a string, we end up with an extra set of quote marks once it goes through as it passes through the CPU. So there is a reason for it. It's not arbitrary, but I can pass in that file I just created, the back.png. And then that puts that background behind that image. And yeah, as you see, the little bits we do, it starts to add up and get a lot of different colors. All this stuff is just completely random. I'm just throwing colors, and well, you saw how quickly I made that random image. I was hardly even looking at that when I did it. But we take these principles with some better choices in colors, and we can make pages look really nice really quickly. It doesn't take a whole lot to get there. So I'm going to apply that same thing to the page. So background image, again, the URL, and where the file is at. So really a directory structure, but we haven't talked about directories yet. So thus far in class, everything's just been at that level. So I reload that. You see it kind of, well, that image was specifically selected to line up. But it looks like that pattern's kind of big and stretched out. By default, which one is it by default? By default, it's set to no repeat. So we could also set background repeat. Since that image that I just created there, I know does line up on the top and bottom and left and right, I could set that to be a repeating image. And that way it doesn't stretch out. I don't really notice much of a difference. Was that image bigger than I thought it was? Where's my zip? I'm gonna select that and make it smaller. Something like that. Okay, changed a little bit there. I guess it was bigger than I thought, but you can see that white spot in the middle, it's repeating. And then that image was specifically set up so that it lines up. If you don't want it to repeat, we actually type the words no-repeat. And then there's just one of them there. And to stretch it, there are two options. Background size is the property. And then our two options are either contain or cover. So contain stretches to fit the available area. So if I'll go ahead and make this big, you can see it's going to have to stretch horizontally a lot more than it stretches vertically. So contain will just do that. It stretches, well, once it filled it up vertically, it said, okay, I'm done. So it just stretches until it hits an edge. The other one is cover. And that's the one that, well, like the name implies, it fills the entire area and stretches it out to fill the whole area. So that's basically the options you have. So you can either set it to no repeat and either put in contain or cover, or I'll comment that out. Type that in. To get my cursor at the end there, if you're not familiar with the home and end keys on your keyboard, they're very, very useful when typing code for those who are new to coding things. Home and end, there's some really, really useful keys you're going to want to start using wherever they're at on your keyboard, because it's different keyboard to keyboard. But you're probably going to want to practice reaching the home and end key wherever they're at, because a lot of times we want to get to the beginning or end of the line. Or if you have one that matches up, you can just set the background repeat to repeat. And then, yeah, I think I went over with those, you get a pattern. You know, if you're waiting on the art department and you just need to put something tiled there to hold the place, you get your pattern and then you flip it over horizontally. You make a copy of that and flip it over vertically, and then all the sides will line up. And it can be done really, really quick. So you can just do a whole bunch of them really quick and choose the best looking one, is what I usually do. I actually learned how to do that making the plywood for Oprah Winfrey's private jet. It was some nice wood. It was a black Ipe burl. So it was a cancer that grew on a rare African tree, and they sliced the tumor into a veneer, and then we had to stretch it out into plywood big enough. A small tumor from a tree cut into a very, very thin veneer, made into plywood to cover a private jet. But that's where I learned how to do all that book matching stuff. I imagine that plane looks really, really, really nice with that wood on it. So rare, exotic stuff that only a few people in the world can afford. But yeah, just take your pattern, flip it over, line them up, and then copy it again and flip it over the other way. And that way you have something that lines up, because for the really nice ones, really high quality ones, the art department might take a little while getting you tiled images. And if you know a tiled image is going to go there, you might as well put a placeholder in to get everything lined up. I just wanted to show that. And yeah, every design we do is going to be a little bit different, right? So you just want to take these basic concepts and play around with them. Get used to working with them. So the last thing I wanted to do is something we've already looked at. If I go to W3 schools, remember that's going to, the W3 consortium are the ones that set the standard. They're the ones that set the standard. So this should be your primary reference. And if you go to the CSS reference, everything on the CSS reference has this try it yourself box. So pictures are in the way. Go to the reference. And then whichever one you're wanting to work with. So we looked at borders today. So when you go to the CSS border reference here on this page, which is running really, really slow, it'll have some examples, and then there's this button that says try it yourself that goes to an editor where you can see it in live time. So for today's stuff, this is probably one you're going to want to play around with a lot. And then you can just start messing with, kind of adjusting these and seeing what does what. So change that 5 pixel solid red to 15 pixels. Groove and some other color. So HSLA 273, 12%, 76%, 22%. And just kind of mess around with different things and see what happens. And then you can just hit the run button and see that change. Well, that was apparently way too transparent. Oh, I missed a comma. I'll put the comma in there. That one's still apparently way too transparent to say. Let's try 82%. Whoops. I don't know what I just clicked there. Oh, helps if I type the word right. Groove has 2 O's in it. There we go. You can see and make those changes and see them in live time. So that is probably where you're going to want to spend a lot of the time from lab time for today, messing around with that stuff and getting used to it. But we have a very small number of concepts. We saw quite a few there today that when we mix and match those in different ways, we can make things look, we basically have infinite options, right? Mixing and matching them different ways, we can make the page look exactly like we want it to. And more. There's some really fancy images. I will dig up, I'll dig around, see if I can find some really, really nice ones. Pictures that people drew entirely in CSS, like the Simpsons cartoon one. It's kind of impressive that somebody did that all in CSS. They clearly had way too much time on their hands to do that. And some other ones. I'll pull those up and share them Wednesday. But does anybody have any questions about that stuff?
I will probably ask you how to do that thing you did in Paint again, because you went through it real quick, and I don't use Paint much. So when we're all done with all this other stuff, I may ask you to walk me through that.
Okay. Yeah, it's just the patterns, where I got the patterns. So I'll walk through it real quick again, because it's a useful thing, because even for just temporary images. So I picked one of the shapes. I'll just go with the square. Can you see my screen, Joe?
No, I can't see your screen. I cannot see it.
I thought I clicked the button. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, so in a new file, I picked one of the shapes, just maybe a square. And normally when we draw a square, we have like that solid outline.
Right.
Instead of the outline, I'm going to turn the outline off and use one of these fill patterns, like maybe an oil fill.
Oh, okay. So you picked up a fill pattern, which gave it a kind of an uneven fill.
Yes. Then like maybe throw in some blue and maybe, I don't know, some purpley on top of it. I usually do at least 3 layers just to kind of mix them. So I'll do blue and then a purpley thing and then another blue back on top of it, just to get a random pattern. Then what I want to do is select everything. So I'll hit Control A to select all of it. and then Control C to copy it.
Right.
And with it on the clipboard, and the color 2 is the one that shows in the fill pattern. So I'm going to change color 2, which is the background color, back to white. I'm going to stretch this out and hit Control V, just paste that in there.
And flip it.
And right click, and you can rotate, flip horizontally or vertically. So flip horizontally.
Right. And then you and then you just move it over there until it hits.
Yeah. And line it up. Whoops, I got a little bit off, but and take a look. You can see there's a little bit of off there, but if I hit, whoops, I get rid of this extra white space. I'm gonna hit Control A and move everything up a little to get rid of that spot I got off on.
So it matches pretty close.
Yeah. Then hit Control A, copy to put it on the clipboard, and then give yourself some space and paste it in there and flip it again. Vertically. And yeah, then when it lines back up, all the sides match up. The one thing you do have to watch is watch the center. Notice this formed a nice little circle. That formed a circle in the center.
So your center should show some sort of pattern with whatever.
Oh, I would say you want to be careful with the center, because that's the one that right there in the center. That's the same corner from the original picture, right?
Right. So you've kind of gone around. You've gone around that spot.
Yeah. Yeah. That's usually when I if I start making them and just keep going over and over again, the ones that I don't pick, it's because of what happens in that center. So it doesn't exactly work, because I do that really quickly and get a whole bunch of them and then just pick the one that looks good. But yeah, just flip it a couple times so that everything lines up, and then stuff lines up left.
And then instead of using a background color, you use a background image.
Yep. And yeah, it's definitely something to play around with.
And if you did a really decent job of that, you could use that for the back end of your page if you really did a nice job of it. And if you liked it better than the gradient. I play with the gradient stuff, and
yeah, you'll want to play around with this stuff to find out what you're like. Plus, every page is a new page, so you're going to do different stuff on different things. So you definitely want to play around with it. So that's why there was a bunch of things that today is even more than the colors last week that you're going to want to go in there and play around with. So what do we have? About an hour and a half left for lab time. So just try messing around with stuff and go to that W3 School site and use their little try yourself button, where you have an editor right there and can see the effects in live time and get used to the things and figure out what you're going to do. Otherwise, remember your project is due this week. You all have your proposal, not the project, the proposal for the project. This week, you're going to tell me what you want to make for the project. There's still like 5.5 weeks to make the project. So, sorry, I said that backwards. Your proposal for the project is due this week, so you're going to want to let me know what you're going to make for the project. I might as well go over this real quick. I was going to talk about it Wednesday. We'll talk about it more on Wednesday. My recommendation in classrooms is templates. In the real world, I'm not a huge fan of templates, but in the classroom, it's a great learning tool. So just check for project proposal template. That's a piece of paper that tells you what to write on it. Make sure you check free project proposal template. You don't need to buy one. Sorry. When I saw all those ads, I was like, oh yeah, some people charge a lot for templates. And just, we're going to look at this Wednesday and just look at some project proposal template, and then you'll fill that out with the idea you have. But we'll talk about that Wednesday. And I was just wanting to remind you that is due this week. You need to tell me what you want to make for your semester-long project. But otherwise, does anybody have any other questions? Okay, so let's call this last hour and a half live time. I'm going to keep my setup here in my gym, not in my office. So if you send me a text message or an Ivy Learn message, it will make noise on my phone, so I can be back on here in a couple seconds. So sometimes it seems like the Ivy Learn messages might take a few minutes, but yeah, I'm going to keep the setup here until our normal class time's scheduled to end 4:50. So while you're working on stuff, if you get stuck, just send me a message and then we can hop back on Zoom immediately. Otherwise, I will see you all Wednesday. Everybody have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.